Sirens rang out, shattering the morning peace and scattering the birds into the sky across Tel Aviv. We could feel the city shake, and several loud blasts were heard before it became clear that one missile had made it through the Iron Dome and struck at the heart of the business district.
The shelter, we are sitting in the shelter room. The door was slapped away.
Madar lives just next to where the missile landed. Luckily, the many offices in the area were already closed. Iran had sent some of its most powerful missiles in this latest barrage.
It's a tsunami of bombs, not from the sea, from the sky.
At the same time this morning, Israel targeted another nuclear facility in Iran. Most Iranians have heeded Israeli warnings to evacuate. But this young man has decided to stay. He told us he's afraid of arrest by the Iranian regime and scared of Israel's bombs. He feels stuck in the middle, not knowing what to do. It has seemed like Donald Trump might share that feeling. His press secretary has revealed he will decide whether to join the war within the next 2 weeks.
Based on the fact that there's a substantial chance of negotiations that may or may not take place with Iran in the near future, I will make my decision whether or not to go within the next 2 weeks.
A missile strike on the largest hospital in southern Israel on Thursday morning triggered ominous warnings from the Israeli government and calls for the US to get involved. The Prime Minister said Iran would pay a high price.
They're targeting a hospital. In this hospital, there are patients who are immobile. They can't even move. Right next to it is a children's ward, a baby's ward, infants. They targeted.
The Soroka hospital had mostly been evacuated, so there were not any serious casualties. But today, patients were being moved to safety. There is a crater in the roof of one of the older buildings where the missile struck.
All of the windows in the building were blown out by the power of the blast. We can see that many of the ceilings have collapsed, and here on the ground there is a mound of rubble, of bricks, door frames, pipes and boxes of medical equipment.
Any missile that makes it through is a win for Iran, but this hit on an Israeli hospital could lead us into a more dangerous and decisive phase of this conflict. Debbie Edward, News at 10, Southern Israel.
Well, for Donald Trump, committing American forces to war would, of course, be momentous. John is here to take us through what the president will be weighing up in these hours and days ahead. John.
That's right, Julie. For a president who won an election with the promise to keep the US out of forever wars, Donald Trump has a big decision to make. Does he step now into Israel's war against Iran? So far, Israel has hit several Iranian nuclear and ballistic missile sites, but it doesn't have the firepower to destroy the mountain fortress at Fordow, where Iran has been enriching uranium that could make nuclear bombs. The target is buried beneath 80 to 90 metres of granite, steel and concrete. The United States is the only military in the world equipped to break through with its B-2 stealth bombers that carry this enormous explosive. It's known as the Massive Ordnance Penetrator, or MOP. It's 6 metres long and weighs more than 13 tonnes. Not so much a bunker buster as a mountain slayer. Now, the US military is said to have rehearsed this attack in the past. Experts reckon it would take at least 2 pinpoint strikes to wipe out the facility. Scientists say the danger of radioactive contamination is localised, but much more of a worry for Trump is the military fallout and the chances of Iranian retaliation. There are many US bases and many more US military assets heading to the region that are within reach of Tehran's formidable arsenal of shorter-range missiles. most vulnerable is the Strait of Hormuz, through which around a fifth of the world's oil passes. At its narrowest, it is just 20 miles wide. Iran could try to close it to all shipping, creating economic havoc. That would make this crisis a big problem for the entire world and perhaps embroil America in exactly the kind of conflict Donald Trump's always said he wants to avoid. It should be no surprise, Julie, if he takes his time to make up his mind.
OK, John, thank you very much indeed for that. Well, let's think a little bit more on that and talk to Dan in Washington. As John was just taking us through there, the president has given himself a bit more time, it would appear. Is there any sense that he might yet step back, do you think?
Well, I think this comment relayed by his press secretary today that a decision would be taken within 2 weeks does inject this kind of sense of caution rather than urgency. And if you take that with what he said yesterday about next week will be big, I think that does build up a picture that he is going to take his time on this. And the kind of wider context, Julie, is there is a vigorous debate and division within his own party. There are the isolationists led by people like the Vice President J.D. Vance, the Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth, and the Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard, who really don't want to get involved with another Middle Eastern war. It is, after all, part of the pitch that Donald Trump made to the nation during the election, that he wouldn't do that. Then you've got the much more interventionist wing led by sort of Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, with chipping into that Mike Kurilla, the head of CENTCOM, and the Israelis, of course, who all say this is a window of opportunity. We've got to take it now before Iran moves, this fissile material away. The other thing that's going to be a factor for Donald Trump, I think, is the price of oil. As you heard John mentioning there, if the Iranians decide to shut the Straits of Hormuz, that would lead to an oil price shock, which would feed into inflation and be very damaging for the domestic economy here in the US. And that's something he'll be really concerned about.
OK, Dan, thank you very much indeed for that. Well, tonight the Foreign Secretary has been holding talks in Washington ahead of talks in Geneva with Iran in the morning. Robert's here just to take us through Britain's position on this. And this, I mean, it is quite an extraordinary position that David Lammy finds himself in Washington, pinging over to Geneva for more talks tomorrow. Where are we at with the UK government's position on all of this?
So, as I've been saying for several days, Keir Starmer is committed to what he calls de-escalation. You and me, that means a ceasefire. And, I mean, I have to say, in the context of the G7, I was concerned he was sort of misreading the room, and in particular the mood of the American president, who's become increasingly belligerent and threatening to bomb Iran. So I've had a report out of the meeting that the Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, and indeed Peter Mandelson, the British ambassador, had with Steve Witkoff, who is the special envoy for the Middle East, President Trump's special envoy, and Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State. They had about an hour in the White House, and they emerged, I suppose, with two big thoughts. One is that they genuinely believe Americans would prefer a diplomatic solution, and that there is, as we've been hearing, probably 2 weeks to reach that diplomatic solution before President Trump, if there isn't one, decides to bomb with all manner of potential worrying consequences. So they think diplomacy is his preference. That's the president. But they all were also told that all of them, Rubio, Trump, Witkoff, are pessimistic that Iran can move enough. And there is one big stumbling block, which is perfectly obvious, which is that Iran will not negotiate with the Americans while Israel is bombing. At the moment, there's no sign of Israel letting off any of that. Now, the other, I suppose, semi-positive thing is, as you pointed out, we've got the Foreign Secretary going to Geneva tomorrow with other European foreign ministers meeting their Iranian counterpart. And the Americans have told Lammy they want to report back to at least get some information about whether or not genuinely the British think the Iranians can be flexible enough to offer to completely scrap in a verifiable way their nuclear weapons capability.
OK, I'll let you pick your phone up, Robert. Thank you very much indeed for that. Thank you. Well, let's speak then finally to Emma in northern Iraq. I mean, it seems as though these talks that Robert was just talking about there in Geneva are something of a long shot, some optimism that there may be a space for diplomacy. What is the thinking in the region tonight? What are you hearing?
I'm not sure I would go as far at this point from here as to say optimism is the overriding feeling. I think perhaps people have dared take a small breath in the hope that there could be some space being carved out for diplomacy. But I think that there is not a great hope that that diplomacy will necessarily bear fruit. And I think there is also quite a significant anxiety about whether or not this is something that can be trusted, whether the words coming out of the White House are really absolutely true, or whether there is perhaps some attempt here to cause a decoy response and actually make people think that there is more time to think about the situation, and actually in reality there is not. The feeling that I suspect that many people have here is that that meeting tomorrow of the EU foreign ministers and the Iranians is important. It may not be entirely consequential though, because of course the Iranians are going to have to make some serious moves in order to try and settle the American position, and it is very unlikely that they are willing to go as far as the Americans and indeed the Israelis and other world powers will want them to go. I guess the toss-up for the Iranians is what is most important. What is most important in terms of how much they want to hold on to their nuclear program and how much they want to see regime survival, and the two are incredibly closely linked now.